David was a simple farmer who lived in a small village surrounded by wide green fields. Every morning, he woke up early to take care of his crops and water his plants. One bright morning, as he walked toward his field with a bucket of water, something strange caught his eye. In the middle of his land, there was a huge dark hole. It was round, deep, and looked like it had appeared overnight. David stopped and stared, shocked. He had been farming on that land for years, but he had never seen anything like it before. The hole looked so deep that he could not see the bottom. When he threw a small stone inside, he waited for the sound to come back, but there was only silence. A cold wind came from the hole, and it made him feel uneasy. David slowly stepped closer, peeking inside, but the darkness was endless. It looked like a tunnel leading deep underground. Worried, David decided not to go near it again until someone else could see it. He went back to his house and called his best friend, Max. When Max arrived, he was also shocked by the strange hole. The two friends walked around it, trying to guess what it could be. "Maybe it's a sinkhole," Max said. "Or maybe something is hiding down there," David replied nervously. They felt a strange vibration under their feet, like something was moving deep below. The sound was faint, like a whisper or a hiss. Both men looked at each other, scared, confused, and curious at the same time. They didn't know that this hole would bring danger, death, and fear to their quiet farmland. Something evil was waiting inside, hidden in the dark earth, ready to come out soon. David could not stop thinking about the strange hole in his farmland. The image of that dark pit stayed in his mind all night. He could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt as if something from the hole was watching him. The next morning, he decided to call his best friend Max again. When Max arrived, he looked worried. "Did it grow bigger?" he asked. David nodded and said, "I think so. The ground around it looks like it's sinking slowly." Both men walked carefully around the hole. The edges were soft, and the soil looked freshly broken, as if the earth had opened recently. Max threw a small rock into the hole, but again, there was no sound of it hitting the bottom. The silence was strange and heavy. David picked up a dry branch and tried to measure the depth, but the branch disappeared into the darkness. "What could make something like this?" Max asked. David shrugged. "Maybe an animal's tunnel or an old mine?" But both of them knew that it was too big for that. The air near the hole was cold and smelled like wet soil and something rotten. Even the birds had stopped singing around the field. The whole place felt lifeless and scary. David said, "We should tell someone. Maybe the hunters in the village can help. They have strong dogs. They can check what's inside." Max agreed, though he felt uneasy. As they walked back to the village, both men kept looking behind them. The hole seemed darker now, almost breathing slowly. It was like the earth itself was alive, waiting. Neither David nor Max knew that calling others for help would only make things worse. The more people came near that hole, the more danger would rise from below. The next day, David and Max returned to the field early in the morning. The weather was cloudy and the air felt heavy. The strange hole was still there, darker than before. Its edges had spread wider overnight, and the soil around it looked freshly disturbed, as if something had crawled up during the night. David stood there quietly, thinking. "We still don't know how deep it is," he said. Max nodded. "Yes, but maybe we can test it somehow." After a few moments of silence, Max got an idea. "What if we pour water into it?" he said. "If the hole fills up, maybe it's not so deep. But if it keeps sinking, we'll know it's endless." David agreed, though his heart felt uneasy. The idea sounded simple, but something about it didn't feel right. Still, they decided to try. They brought long water pipes from David's house, connected them to the water tank, and set the flow toward the hole. As water began to pour in, a strange sound came from below, like a whisper mixed with a hiss. The ground trembled slightly. Both men stepped back, watching carefully. Maybe it's just air moving inside, Max said nervously. But David felt cold sweat on his neck. The air around the hole smelled damp and strange, like something old and dead. The more water they poured, the darker the hole seemed to become. Small bubbles rose from inside, and the ground gave off a low rumbling noise. The sound sent chills down their spines. They stopped the water for a moment, staring at each other. "Let's call the hunters now," David said. "If something is down there, they'll find out." Max nodded quickly. They had no idea that the water they poured had woken up something ancient, something that had been sleeping deep inside the earth for years. David and Max decided to call the village hunters. They hoped the hunters could help them find out what was inside the strange hole. The hunters were known for catching wild animals that entered farms or forests nearby. They had brave dogs that could sense danger and find hidden creatures. Later that afternoon, 3 hunters arrived. Their names were Tom, Rick, and Jordan. They brought 6 strong dogs with them, big, trained, and brave animals that never feared anything. David and Max told them everything about the strange hole, the missing sound of stones, and the strange movement under the ground. When the hunters reached the field, the dogs began barking loudly. Their ears went up, and their bodies stiffened as if they had sensed something invisible. The hunters tried to calm them, but the dogs refused to go near the hole. They stood at a distance, growling deeply. Tom said, "Something is definitely down there." Rick threw a torchlight into the hole to see inside, but it disappeared into the darkness without showing the bottom. Then, a faint hissing sound came from below, long and sharp. It sounded like hundreds of snakes whispering together. David stepped back, frightened. "Did you hear that?" he said. Everyone nodded silently. The ground trembled lightly again, and the dogs started barking wildly, pulling their ropes hard. One of them broke free and ran toward the hole, barking into it. Suddenly, a sharp hiss came, and the dog yelped in pain before running back. The hunters looked at each other, worried now. Jordan said, "Maybe we should stop. It's not safe." But David didn't want to give up yet. "Let's pour more water," he said. "Maybe it will push whatever's inside out." The hunters hesitated, but finally agreed. None of them realized that this decision would awaken the horror sleeping under their feet. The next morning, David, Max, and the 3 hunters returned to the field. The sky was gray and the air felt strangely cold. The hole looked even darker, as if it was waiting for them. The ground around it had cracked more during the night, and the soil smelled of wet mud and decay. David brought the water pipes again and said, "We will pour water slowly this time. Let's see what happens." The hunters tied their dogs at a distance so they could watch safely. The dogs were restless, growling, and pulling their ropes. They could sense something dangerous inside the hole. As the water started flowing, everyone stood quietly listening. For a few minutes, nothing happened. The water disappeared into the darkness like before. Then, a strange bubbling sound came from deep below. The ground shook a little, and small bubbles of muddy water rose to the surface. "What's that noise?" Max asked nervously. The sound grew louder. It was like something moving under the earth, twisting and sliding. The hunters looked at each other, their faces pale. Suddenly, a bad smell filled the air, like rotten eggs mixed with something dead. One of the dogs began barking wildly and broke free again, running toward the hole. Before the hunters could stop it, the dog stopped at the edge and started barking down. Then a sharp hissing noise echoed from below, louder this time. The ground near the hole moved slightly, as if something was pushing upward. The bubbling became faster. David turned off the water quickly. Everyone stepped back, staring at the hole in silence. "What did we wake up?" Max whispered. The hunters didn't reply. The sound of hissing continued from the dark pit, and the cold air around them grew thicker. The ground under their feet pulsed slow, deep, and alive like the earth was breathing. Something inside that hole was awake now, waiting to rise. The next few minutes felt like a nightmare. Everyone stood frozen near the hole, afraid to move. The hissing sound grew louder, spreading through the air like wind in a tunnel. The dogs barked madly, pulling their ropes, trying to run away. Suddenly, the ground near the hole cracked open with a loud noise. From the darkness, something started to crawl out. At first, it looked like black ropes, wet and shining. But when the sunlight hit them, everyone realized what they were: snakes. Hundreds of snakes. They poured out of the hole like water, sliding and twisting across the soil. Big ones, small ones, green, brown, and black, their bodies covered the ground. The hunters shouted in fear, pulling their guns, but it was too late. The snakes moved too fast. The dogs barked and tried to fight, biting and jumping, but the snakes attacked them, biting again and again. The hunters tried to save their animals, but the snakes were everywhere, crawling up their boots, wrapping around their legs, striking with sharp fangs. "Run!" Max shouted. David pulled him back, and they both ran toward the truck. Behind them, they could hear the hunters screaming as snakes bit their hands and faces. The dogs' cries filled the air, then went silent one by one. David looked back for just a second. The hole was no longer just a hole. It looked alive, moving like a giant mouth. More and more snakes kept coming out, covering the entire field like a black wave. He and Max jumped into the truck, shaking with fear. The snakes were spreading fast, crawling toward everything in their way. David started the engine with trembling hands, and they drove away as fast as they could. The land they left behind was silent, covered in moving shadows, a sea of deadly snakes that had risen from the depths of the earth. David and Max drove as fast as they could, their hands shaking and hearts beating fast. Behind them, they could still hear faint hissing sounds carried by the wind. They didn't stop until they reached the edge of the village. Both men jumped out of the truck, their faces pale and covered in sweat. "What did we just see?" Max whispered, still breathing heavily. David couldn't answer. His eyes were wide, staring into nothing. "Snakes. Thousands of them," he finally said. "They came from that hole. We shouldn't have touched it." The two men went straight to the local police station and tried to explain what had happened. But the officer on duty laughed and said, "Snakes? That many? Maybe you imagined it." David begged them to send someone to check, but no one believed them. Finally, a few young men from the village agreed to go and see. When they returned hours later, their faces were white with fear. "Your field is gone," one of them said. "It's full of holes now. The soil is moving. We saw snakes everywhere." After that day, no one dared to go near David's land again. At night, people in nearby houses began to hear strange hissing sounds coming from the direction of the fields. Cows and goats went missing. Some villagers said they saw dark shapes crawling in the moonlight. David and Max decided to leave the village forever. Before leaving, David looked one last time at his farmland from a distance. The big hole was still there, darker than ever, and the ground around it seemed to breathe slowly up and down, like something alive under the earth. He whispered, "We woke them up," and turned away. No one ever farmed that land again. The place became known as the Hole of Snakes, where the earth itself hid something evil, waiting for the next fool to disturb it. And that was the terrifying story of the Hole of Snakes. What do you think? Was it just a natural sinkhole, or something far darker hidden beneath the earth? Would you dare to go near a hole like that if you found one on your land? Tell me your answer in the comments below. I'm reading every single one. Eyes. If this story gave you chills, don't forget to like the video right now. Subscribe to the channel for more real horror stories. And turn on the bell icon so you never miss what's coming next. Because the next story might be even darker than this one. See you in the next nightmare.